Hello, everybody, and welcome to another presentation of the online ColdFusion Meetup. I'm Charlie Arehart, and I'll be your host again for the next hour or so. And in this edition of the Meetup, our 308th, being recorded on Thursday, August 8th, 2024 at noon U.S. Eastern, it's me again. Don't worry, next week it'll be somebody else. But I'm happy to do these. I've got lots of talks that I've just never given on the Meetup that I've given to other conferences and events. So I'm glad to be able to do this one called CfSchedule Tasks. There's more than you may know. And it's one that I've long wanted to do because I work with people every day and I sometimes show things and they go, wait, what? I didn't know they could do that. Or they'll say, hey, they can't do this. And I'll say, yes, they can. Or here's when they can't. Anyway, so that's what this talk is about. So things that you ought to know and that sometimes I find people don't know. So before we get started, let me just add for those who don't come here very often, you can see down there at the bottom, but also want to show here on the next screen that all the recordings are posted afterwards at this URL. They're also on YouTube. There's a YouTube playlist. And then if you want to ever present, I'm happy to have anybody speak. And again, next week we'll have somebody else. I'll get that announcement out later today. But just check out that website, speak.coldfusionmeetup.com, and you can reach out. Okay, let's get going. So on this talk, what are we going to talk about today? Well, I want to start with just the basics because some of you may go, I already know this, but others don't. They don't ever use schedule tasks. So before we talk about the cool things that maybe others who use them don't know about, we should at least level set everybody. So we'll talk about some basics. And then we'll also explain the different ways you can create tasks. You might be surprised to hear this, or some people will say, no, that's old news. But I'd be willing to bet that one of them I'm going to show you and I go, wait, what? I didn't know about that. So I have a whole nother talk on that subject. We'll get to that then. Then I really want to get to this, solving common problems, because I'd see this a lot. I mean, a lot, where people say, I can't run my scheduled task. I try to do X, Y, Z, and it doesn't work. And different people have different ideas. And I've just got a set of things that I've found are very common and techniques for solving them. And then again, some people say, well, I heard that scheduled tasks can't do this. They can't do that. And I'll show you what things they might think they can't do and whether and how they can do those. And then I'll talk about advanced and additional features that sometimes if you don't think to click on the right button, you wouldn't even know they were there. And then it might help some people know how, well, if I ever needed to tweak things, how would I go about tweaking the configuration files that relate to scheduled tasks? I'll show you that. Not that it's everybody's cup of tea to do that, but I'll show you. And then lastly, kind of wrap up, how do you control access to? Not how do you run them, but how do you control who can run them? Wait, what? Yes, you can make it so that somebody could run scheduled tasks and somebody else can't. And there's different, meanings to that. So we'll cover that when we get there. And then I'll wrap up with alternatives to scheduled tasks. There's other ways to do the same thing. So if you cannot get past some problem where the solutions I propose don't work for you, then there's other solutions to do the equivalent of a scheduled task. And we'll talk about those at the end. And that's it. So that's quite a lot, right? So we're going to get to that. Scheduled task only available in the enterprise version. So let's make sure Trist is asking. Let me click on this little button so everybody can see it who can't see it. Scheduled tasks only available in the enterprise version. And the answer to that, I could ask others to answer. Nobody did. So I'll go ahead and say, no, that's not true. They're not only available in the enterprise version. So that's a bummer if anybody had that impression. Sorry, I didn't start with that. That would certainly be the lead. No, scheduled tasks work in every version of ColdFusion and have always worked in every version that I've ever worked with back to 27 years ago. So yes, scheduled tasks work in standard, the developer edition, the trial edition, and yes, the enterprise edition. Now, maybe what you were getting at, and this is, someone could be, you could be forgiven if you kind of heard this. There are some features, and I'm going to talk about those later. There are some features under that things scheduled tasks can't do. There are some things that they can only do if you're in ColdFusion Enterprise. So we'll get to that. But that's like, 2% of this talk, and it's probably not even 90% of what most people use scheduled tasks for. So by and large, most people don't care that they can't do the few things that they can't do that they can only do with Enterprise. Okay, so yeah, don't worry about that. Okay, moving on. So for those who don't know me, let me stop and quickly introduce myself. Let me get rid of that little picture. We don't need that anymore. So I focus on CF server troubleshooting as an independent consultant. I don't work for Adobe. I don't work for anybody else. I just work for myself. Happy to do it. And I help folks of all sizes of organizations and all levels of experience, whether you're new or old to ColdFusion, whether you think you know everything or feel like you don't know anything. I'll try to help you wherever you are. I'll meet you wherever you are. And the way I work is remotely, totally. So it's safe and secure, shared desktop, Zoom, Meet, Teams, whatever you want to use. And my goal is to solve most problems in less than an hour and to teach you as we go. So you will get value out of that time and it'll be quick and we'll get in and get out. Sometimes it takes longer, but the point is you won't pay for any time you don't find valuable. Simple as that. Satisfaction guaranteed. And then more on my rates and approach and that satisfaction guarantee and my online calendar to find me and pick time anytime today, tomorrow, next week, next month at carehart.org/consulting. But again, I'm not selling anything. I tell this every session. I'm not here to sell anything. I'm just helping you all learn how to use things in ColdFusion, sharing my experience and that I've learned from other people. And this presentation that we're looking at right now, all these bullet points that are flying by, you can go get this PDF right now. If you go to carehart.org, my site, carehart.org/presentations, or I'm sitting there long enough for anybody who wants to hold your phone up and click that little QR code and that'll take you to the site. I'll give you 2 more seconds. 1, 2. Okay, we're going to move on. Again, it's just carehart.org/presentations. You can Google it and you can find it. I want to start out by pointing out some primary resources from Adobe for finding out more. Like I'm going to show you a bunch of stuff and you might go, how would I know that? Well, you'd know it if you'd read the manual, but who reads manuals anymore these days, right? Well, anyway, in the CF Administrator, up in the top right corner, there is an icon to get help. Let me take you there real quick. I'm going to show you my CF admin. Some folks don't know this, that up in the top right corner, that is a help button. And if you click on that, it opens up a help window. And that help window will show you stuff. And I'm saying that within that help, there is a section which has also been pulled out into a document. And that document is a 4-page, in that document is a 4-page discussion of the admin UI and scheduled tasks. And it's in a manual called Configuring and Administering ColdFusion. And the 4 pages within it, in that PDF, here's the link to that PDF. Well, it's an HTML page in this variant. It's an HTML page, my bad. They're always HTML anymore. There's the HTML page, and there's a link right to that scheduled task section, but it's only 4 pages. Then some of you may know, and we'll talk later, there's a cfschedule tag. You can manage and create scheduled tasks with that. And there's a reference manual discussion of the CF schedule, and it's 7 pages. You might go, wait, what? 7 pages? Yes, 7 pages. And that's in the CFML reference, and there's the URL for that. And I always just show the URLs like this. You'll always know they're italicized. I don't put the www in the HTTP. That all just can be presumed. And that's the file, and it's long, and I get it. So again, go get the PDF, and you can get this URL out of the PDF when you're ready. And then developing CF applications. Let me tell you, man, if you guys haven't seen this thing called Developing CF Applications, it's a couple 1,000-page document that CF has had forever. And it tends to have sections that are dozens of pages on things. And back when CF 10 came out and scheduled tasks and inherited a bunch of new features, there's 7 pages in that Developing ColdFusion Applications that was all about these new features of scheduled tasks. And there's not much other discussion in there. It's just that. But anyway, those 7 pages of stuff are in that manual. And then I also want to point out that Adobe, Suchika Singh from Adobe, gave a presentation at the CF Summit 2019, and it was all about scheduled tasks. And there's the YouTube link for that. So you might want to follow this one up with watching that. She'll present things from a different perspective than I do. Before I move on, I see, thank you. Melissa says, can highly recommend Charlie as a consultant. Let me bring that up. We used him a few years back, and he taught me a lot. Thank you very much for that. And yeah, I love doing it. I get to do it every day. Literally, that's all I do all day, every day is go from call to call to call, like a fireman waiting for the phone call the alarm bell to ring, as it were. All right. Happy to help. Love doing it. All right, moving on. Basic features of scheduled tasks. So let's just start with the most basic features of setting up a scheduled task in the administrator, because that's what most people are going to do. You can do it through code, but here in the administrator, and I'm looking at the CF 2023 administrator. And for those that haven't moved to 2023 yet, I want to tell you, you'll always see this set of buttons on the first launch of the admin. I don't know if that's going to stay like that. These buttons and this look is new since CF 2018. So if you're coming from 2016 or earlier, you're going to really find this weird. But if you're on 2018 or later, you usually would see this at least once. Well, anyway, scheduled tasks are under server settings. And it used to be prior to CF 2018, they were links over here on the left. Well, now they're links across the top. And there's scheduled tasks. And I also want to stress that if you go, man, I can't remember what these buttons mean. Well, first you can click on that and see what the buttons mean. And you might still say, well, I can mouse over that. That's not that impressive. I can't remember what thing's under what button. You're right. It's hard to remember. So look up in the top right corner, there's a magnifying glass. And if you click that magnifying glass, and if I were to type sched, before I can even finish typing it, there's scheduled tasks. And you can just use your mouse to pick it or down arrow and click it. And there we are. So we're in the server settings, first button, server settings, scheduled tasks. All right. That's the way that works. So in here, you can create a new scheduled task. And that's what I want to show you is let's assume we're going to create a new scheduled task. And you pick a name, whatever you want to call it. Bob, it doesn't matter. Any name will work. And then there's a notion of groups. If you don't want to create one, it defaults to a default group. You say, when is the task going to start? And you do have to pick at least when the task is going to start. And then you can choose whether to run them daily, every number of hours, every number of minutes, every number of seconds, at a start time, at an end time, always repeating only so many times, or only run it one time, or run daily, or whatever. I think this is weekly. That's weird. I don't know why I don't see that, but I'm pretty sure the choices usually are like weekly and monthly. That's a little bug. Who knows? Cron time, I'll come back to that later. That is really powerful. Very cool. A lot of people don't know about that. And then for now, let's ignore chain task. And then the URL. And this is the simplest point, is all you really need is a name of it, when it's going to run, and what do you want to call. And it's designed to run a URL, any URL you want. You can point to any URL. You could point to google.com if you wanted to. And then if that URL has what's called basic authentication, where you must provide a username and password, you can put that in here. Now, you might wonder, why does that always say admin? Well, that's because Adobe, and I wish they would fix it, they use the same username field underlying the HTML all over the place. And so if you've got a cookie that fills in username, your browser fills it in, thinking, oh, I've already been there before. Let me put in that username. And same with the password. So you could take those out if you didn't need them. And then there's other things you can configure in the interest of time. Let's just leave it at it's that simple, right? So if I come up here and call it, Bob, and I say it starts, today, and you can use a calendar to pick it, sure enough. And I'll let it run one time at this time, and I'll go to https google.com. There's nothing wrong with that. Google won't care that you do that. And that's it. I've created a scheduled task that simply, and it will run once. And there's Bob. And it was set 5 minutes or 18 minutes from now. So at 11:31, it's set to run. And is it going to repeat? No. How many times should it run? Just the once. Has it run yet? No. So this is nice. And if I wanted to run it, that little running man there, I could just click on it and it will run it. And if I run it, it just runs it. And it says I ran it. Now, it's still scheduled to run. You can run it, but it's still scheduled to run. So this stuff still says not run and next run. Don't worry about that. But you've run it and it'll run again later. And you can edit them by just clicking this edit button and you're back into that same screen we were just looking at. Simple as that. Now, somebody might go trying this right now while we're talking, and they're going to try it in Firefox, for instance, and it's going to fail if they're on certain versions of CF. Let me tell you, I'll deal with that later. There's a current quirky bug that's happening. And if I forget, I'm pretty sure I had that in my notes, but if I forget, if anybody wants to remind me later, do remind me. I could forget. But let's move on. So it's that simple to create a scheduled task. That was the point. Very, very easy. And it just runs that URL and does whatever it's supposed to do. Now, you might say, well, I wanted to do something. And there's other things you could do, like we could have, let me scroll down. We could have said, take the result of that URL and save it to a file. This publish button says, save whatever I called to a file, and you pick the file. And this is a jQuery style interface. You can click it and definitely find whatever folder on the server you want to save the result to. And as long as CF can write to that folder, then the result of that page, whatever it is, will get written to that file, whatever you name, and you can tell it to override it. It is always going to write to the same name. There's no mechanism to say, rotate one time, next time call a different name, next time call a different name. It doesn't work that way. All right. So that's that. So it'll normally just run it, do whatever it's supposed to do. And if you want to save the output, that's what that option there is for, to publish it. Okay. Okay. And we'll talk about additional settings later. And we talked about that. And there is a pause button. If you didn't catch it when I'm on that screen here, that little pause button is saying, hey, that task you're about to run, don't run it. So if I click this button, now it's not going to run. See, it changed. It doesn't look like it. And the play button says, yeah, go ahead and run it again. So yeah, you're free to do that. Or look up here, there's pause and resume all tasks. That was added in CF 2018. That's nice. Because if you import a bunch of tasks from some other server that you're moving from one server to another server, and there's a previous talk I've given on migrating last week, migrating admin settings from one machine to another. If you migrate in a bunch of scheduled tasks, you don't want them both running on both servers. Probably you want running on one or the other. So you could pause them all on one and resume them all on the other. Cool stuff. And I showed you the status stuff already. And again, there's more features we'll talk about, most of them later. Now about the cron, that's very interesting. So I'm going to remind you, when we were in there editing this task, while I could have said these various frequencies, there was this option called crontime. And it says there, to schedule the task, you give a cron expression that contains 6 or 7 space-separated fields. For example, this string implies to run the task daily at noon. And you might go, how does that equate to noon? Well, let's talk about that. And it was added in CF10, but a lot of people never notice because they just add their scheduled tasks as a URL and a time to run, and they leave it at that. But sometimes people will go, like on the forums, they'll go, hey, I'd like to be able to run a task at 5 minutes before noon on the 3rd Friday of every month. I don't see how to be able to do that in there. Well, you can't do that with the features and the buttons that were there, but you can definitely do that with the cron time. It allows incredible flexibility of controlling both the timing and the frequency. And it's really worth its own talk, talking about cron and cron time. And there are resources, because it's cron time and cron jobs are a Linux feature. Cron time is well explained in lots of resources on the web. And traditionally, the format of those space-separated characters is the minute, the hour, the day of the month, then the day of the week. And that's what those asterisks and numbers were about. And then there's special characters for added flexibility. And I'll just say, if you said question mark in one of those places, it means any minute or any hour or any day. Or asterisk means every hour, every minute, every day, and on and on and on. I'll leave you to look into those things. It's really amazingly powerful. And I'll point out that if you want to learn more about cron, a great resource I would recommend is Baildung. I think that's how they pronounce it. It's a funny name. And it's not somebody's name, and it's just the name of an organization. And they do great stuff. They produce great documentation, great articles every day, like several per day. And they're mostly Linux oriented, but not always. They're moving towards more DevOps stuff recently. They're really big into Spring and Spring Boot. Anyway, I get their stuff every day through an RSS feed, and almost every day I learn some cool thing from them. And this is a great resource from them on learning about and understanding cron expressions. And they just do a really good job. They have excellent editorial to make sure that it's well organized. Sometimes it's not right. And there's comments at the bottom. If you want to correct things, you can let them know. But I definitely recommend it. In fact, I use this so much, they have ads all over the place. It's frustrating, but they got to make money. I understand. They give away this content. They use ads to make money. Just recently, they've introduced a new membership program, and I just signed up this week. It's $27 a year. I'm happy to pay them $27 a year to get their content without all the ads popping up all over the place. So just know that that's coming. It's not available publicly, but the guy behind it, Eugene, shared that with me because I've raised the concern. I was looking at it on a phone one day, and I couldn't even see the content because there were images and ads everywhere. So anyway, press on, look at it on a computer. It's really not bad on a computer. And then they have specific examples of cron expressions. And I'd recommend go look at that example. It's great. Now, I do want to point out that the cron, I just tested again in standard version. It doesn't work. It did when I scheduled in developer version. The same URL works when I run the browser and the server. Okay, so hold that, Trist. You're not saying that you couldn't create a scheduled task, are you? You're saying you created a scheduled task, you ran it, and the thing it was supposed to do didn't do what it was supposed to do. Is that right? Can you say yes or no to my last question? I'm going to bring the question up in front of everybody so it's a little more obvious. So I'm going to ask one more time. Trist, are you saying that the URL that was supposed to be called seems never have been called? Right. That's not that the scheduled task isn't working. I know that's the way you perceive it to be. And it's also not, more importantly, it's not that scheduled tasks don't work on enterprise or they don't work on standard, but it worked when I scheduled. I hear you. I get it. You said the same scheduled tasks work in the developer version. We'll come back to that later. Let's raise that when I talk about solving problems, okay? Just hold that question. It's a good question. I look forward to talking about it, but let's come back to it later. So back to the cron time stuff. I wanted to say the cron format for CF is different, and that can be confusing when you're looking into resources online. You'll go, wait a minute, I put in the cron that I got off of Availdung. You told me to use it, and it's not quite working right. Well, let's talk about that. CF tasks, scheduled tasks, are based on something called Quartz. So Adobe, back in CF10 in 2012, Adobe brought into ColdFusion the Quartz framework. It's an open source Java framework for scheduled tasks. And instead of what they had been doing for many years themselves, they leverage Quartz. And in leveraging Quartz, you don't know it. It's just the interface looks the same. Admin, scheduled task, they took care of that. But under the covers, the Quartz format for cron jobs, which is similar to Spring, by the way, Spring framework, they add a leading second value. So ColdFusion and Quartz and Spring let you have a cron job have a leading second value. Well, that could be confusing if you aren't paying close attention. So it's second, minute, hour, day of month, day of week, year. And they add year at the end. And the second value is required because it goes up front, but the rest are optional. And the rest aren't optional, but year is optional. So they added the option to control a year. You don't have to use that. But unfortunately, when you write a cron time in CF, you've got to remember to put in the second. Now, this is documented, not in Adobe. They don't do a good job of documenting it, but at the Quartz site, which is called quartzscheduler.org. Just go to this URL, quartzscheduler.org. And I'm pretty sure that 2.2.2 is either the version that CF uses or it's a recent version that's close to what CF uses. And just trust me, go there. You're going to find it's just perfectly helpful. Even better, check out this online tool for building not just crons, but crons, Quartz crons. Okay. And I've even got that page open to show you because I thought it was compelling enough. So this is it, freeformatter.com and their Quartz cron generator and explainer. And these tools are just great. Because when you're like, what the heck am I doing? Somebody gave me this. What does it even mean? Or I'm trying to do this. How do I get it to do it? So you can either put in something and it tells you what it means, or you can come down here and pick what you want and it'll generate the cron for you. So that's just awesome. So definitely check that tool out if you're going to use that cron stuff. All right, let's move on. We got plenty of other things to talk about. How can you create scheduled tasks? Besides that CF administrator, you can also use the CF schedule tag. And I'm not going to look at it because I just want to tell you those pages that I pointed to, and I told you it was several pages. It's several pages because they've got examples. So just go look at that docs. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip that, but go look at the docs. Then there's also the admin API that was introduced in CF7, and there's a way for you to write code that does basically things that the administrator does. And there's a set of CFCs that if you're an administrator and you want to log into code with your password, you can then call virtually any method of this admin API, and there's a method for creating scheduled tasks. You can also export and import settings between instances. So to create a scheduled task on server B, you can export it out of server A and import it into server B. And that's the talk I gave last week here on the Meetup, and you can find that at that recordings.coldfusionmeetup.com. You can find last week's session. And the way to export things include the CF Administrator CAR or ColdFusion Export or ColdFusion Archive feature, CAR. Or in CF 2021 and above, there's a command line tool called CF Setup. And then some of you know, and I talked about last week, all of these. There's also Ordis's command box CF Config tool. So any of these tools can help you build scheduled tasks. And there's still more alternatives, including Ortus one. So that's not what we're talking about right now. We're saying, how do we create CF schedule tasks? All right. So anyway, back to another option is the migration wizard. And again, I talked about all those 4 things right there: car, CF setup, CF config, and the migration wizard. I talked about them all last week in the talk I gave. So go check that out. Now we can talk about common problems. Why does the task fail even though I can visit it in my browser, right? So that's what Trist raised. In visiting the URL in the browser, it works, but in the scheduled task, it doesn't seem to work. So before we talk about it, worked in developer, hold that thought. Just want to clarify, when a CF scheduled task runs, it runs from within CF via Java through something under the covers in Java called HTTP client. So when you go to your browser and run it, it's your browser running it. And if you're not careful, it could be the browser on your local machine, and ColdFusion could be on some remote machine. That's not running it from the same place. But even if you go to the browser of the server running CF, or as in Trist's example, it was the same machine with ColdFusion and the browser, it still might not work. Well, how could that be? Well, there's many ways and reasons. The browser might have capabilities or improvements that the CF or the Java underlying CF doesn't have. And there's all kinds of stuff like various, HTTP 3 and other kinds of stuff. The server that you're calling might be happy to talk to a modern browser, and when it gets talked to from this underlying CF HTTP client thing, it might not be the capabilities that it wants. That's a stretch, but here's more likely what happens to most people is you're making an HTTPS call, and the HTTPS URL in the scheduled task, when you make the request in your browser is pretty modern, and it has modern certificates and modern root and intermediate certificates. But the Java underlying CF might have older root and intermediate certificates. And in fact, the Java that underlies your ColdFusion might be 10 years old. I've seen it. I've helped people just last week. They had one where the Java was 3 years old. They didn't know this Java underlying CF was 3 years old. Well, a 3-year-old Java might not support some modern encryption algorithm that browsers no longer even use and servers expect. And when CF goes, hey, give me this page, and the server goes, do you talk with this encryption algorithm? And the Java underlying ColdFusion goes, what are you talking about? And then it fails. So I'm just saying, you could run a request in your browser and it would work on the same machine where in CF, it doesn't work. Now, here's your thing. I get it, Trist, you keep saying that. Let me tell you to pay attention to this. First, in your code of your CF server, create a CF page. Call it test.cfm. Doesn't matter what you call it. Put it wherever you want to put code. And in that page, do a CF HTTP. I hope you know what that is. You can Google it to find out. It's one line of code with one attribute. You say CF HTTP URL equals whatever URL you're trying to go to. Close bracket. And then the next line, CF dump. The result of that, you say CF dump var equals # double quote, # CF HTTP, # double quote, close bracket. You dump the CF HTTP result and see what you get. Now, hear me out, Trist. I hope you're listening to me rather than doing it. Hold on, let me finish my thought. If you try this very URL that you're having trouble with, and you put it in the CF page, and you call it with CF HTTP, and you call it the same way in the CF HTTP that you do in the scheduled task, what do you get? Now, I'm not asking you to tell me right now. I'm not even looking at what you're typing. I want to say this for everybody's benefit. If you do that, what do you get? If you get back what you got back in the browser, then the CF HTTP worked. If you don't get back what you got in the browser, then the CF HTTP didn't work. And if the CF HTTP doesn't work, then the scheduled task won't work, because under the covers, they both rely on this thing called HTTP client. And all I'm getting at is, if it doesn't work, what matters is, why doesn't it work? Now, let me turn to your things. You're saying it worked when it was developer, but it doesn't work when it's standard. Right. So now I see a bunch of questions, comments. I used Edge, ColdFusion 2020 Standard. You're right. It might be HBS. Yes, I CF HTTP to talk with the API. My question is, did you do a CF HTTP of the exact URL in the scheduled task? Have you done that yet? Don't worry about if you're in the midst of typing it. Don't say, just say, Have you tried it yet? I want to help you out. Have you tried doing that URL in the scheduled task in a CF HTTP? As I ask this question, simple yes or no. Have you done that yet? Yes or no? I'm not berating you. I just want to move on because we've got other things to talk about, and I want to help you. And this will help everybody because this is a very common problem. Okay, good. You haven't tried it yet. So please do that. If you're feeling like that's important, you've got to solve it today. Go ahead and do that while we move on. Tell us what you find out. I'll be watching the chat. It's a very common problem. And that's the easiest solution is you throw that in. And if it does not work in the CF HTTP, it will not work in the scheduled task. And that can be for any of a number of reasons. And I'm just telling you that could happen because, like, for example, Trish said it worked in developer, but not in standard. Well, maybe they weren't the same machine. Maybe they weren't the same version of ColdFusion. Maybe they weren't the same Java. If they're not the same Java, that would be a problem because it's the Java version underlying CF that really tends to hold back the ability to do an HTTPS call because Java does advance. And if you don't keep up with those advances, browsers say, I'm not going to even let me talk to HTTP 1.1, for example. They stopped supporting HTTP 1.0 and 1.1 about a year and a half ago. Java stopped supporting that. It's a complicated thing. I'll just say you got to keep up with your Javas. That's often the problem. Now, Adobe has a tech note. Look at this URL. They have a tech note for troubleshooting scheduled tasks. And I'll point you to it. It's old, and it's got some old, outdated information, but it's better than nothing. So I'll just say there is that. I did a blog post. I posted it at Adobe's website, so it's an Adobe URL. The coldfusion.adobe.com is the ColdFusion CF portal. I did a blog post in 2019 on errors calling HTTPS solved by updating your JVM. So I explain all this in more detail in there. Let me leave it at that. Okay. Now, this is another thing. People go, well, how can I know if my task even ran and what's the result? So remember, you can use the publish option and it will save the file, the result, into a file. And you could look at that. And check this out. This is very important. There's a scheduled task log, but it is not enabled by default. And it is not on the scheduled task page. It's in the logging page of the CF admin. So let me come up here and go to debugging and logging, right? Oh, who'd have thought of that, right? So remember the buttons, debugging and logging. And up at the top is logging settings. And I don't know who came up with this idea, but there's enabled scheduled task logging right there. And it's not on by default. I wish they would turn it on by default. I think everybody would benefit. And by the way, just so in case somebody goes, well, they didn't do it because they didn't want to fill up your hard drive. No, stop, time out. This just logs that you called a scheduled task and when you called it. Yeah, but I do a million times a day. That would fill up my hard drive. No. ColdFusion logs are set to fill at a maximum of 5,000 K. That's 5 meg, and to keep 10 rotations. So that's 50 meg. The biggest this scheduled task log could be, it's called scheduler.log. The biggest it could take up on your hard drive would ever be 50 meg. I'm sure 50 meg is nothing on your server to allow you to have scheduled task logging, even if it fills up every day. Okay, so don't let that hold you back. Definitely turn on the scheduled task logging. And that's a way to know if your task ran. Now, a lot of people do it the way I suspect Trist was, which is they look for, did the thing that I called do it's supposed to do, what it was supposed to do? Like it was supposed to send me an email. I didn't get my email, therefore it didn't run. Well, did it even call the scheduled task? That's the first question. And then we could go on and say, well, did the request that went to the server even run? And that's another whole subject of, you may not control that server. So I'm not going to talk about that. Now check this out. Why won't my task run if the URL that I'm calling is on a site that's protected by Cloudflare? You wait, listen up. If you're like, what? Yes, if ColdFusion scheduled tasks call a URL and that URL is on a server that's going through Cloudflare, proxying through Cloudflare, if you know what that is, Cloudflare by default goes, who the hell are you, ColdFusion scheduled task? There was a thread discussion about this, and I participated in it. There's the URL for it. I'll suggest you go read that. And I even offered solutions where you go into Cloudflare and you create a page rule that says, hey, if the user agent is cfschedule, please let it through Cloudflare. I know you don't recognize cfschedule as a valid user agent, By the way, they do recognize ColdFusion. That's what CF does, but schedule tasks send a user agent value of cfschedule or whatever it is. I don't remember. The point is, you can tell Cloudflare, please let that through. And you just add one page rule, and even the free account lets you add 5 or 10 page rules. So you could definitely do that. I've done it on my server. If we had more time, I'd show you, but we got to move on. Why do I see my task results being created more than once, right? People say this all the time. My scheduled tasks are running twice. What the hell's going on here? Well, let me tell you, you might literally have your tasks defined in 2 different instances. Remember how I said you ought to pause them when you import them? People don't think to do that. So they go, no, it's not running twice. Well, turn on that scheduler log and then let's talk. Because if you turn on that scheduler log on the instance you're looking at that you think it's running twice and you go, it's only running once. Well, then it's only running once, okay? But if instead you could think, oh, gosh, we did have an old server, and you turn on the scheduler log over there and you go, oh, right, crap, it's running from over there too. It's running twice from 2 different servers. It could happen. Someone could have it in development and in production or staging and production, whatever. And I'll just say one more time, if you control the server that the URLs are being called on, well, then there's other techniques like looking at the web server logs, looking at Fusion Reactor. There's other ways you could log, is the request literally being called more than once? And you could even log, where's it coming from? You can get the IP address of who made the call. Again, if I had time, I'd get into all those details, but that's not the point of this talk. Just needed to tell you there's ways to solve this problem. And by the way, when you create a new instance, if you know about creating new instances on anything but the standard version, so developer, trial, enterprise, you can create another instance. When you create another instance, guess what? It duplicates everything in the admin of the first instance, the CFusion instance. It duplicates everything. And you may not realize, oh crap, on my one machine that's got 2 instances, they both have the same scheduled task. I see this stuff. I do this for a living. I'm telling you, it can happen. Why are my tasks not running when I expect them on the day or time that I expect? And I'll just tell you, Ben Nadell did a blog post where he clarified a big hole in his understanding of scheduled tasks. And I'll leave you to read about that and look at the comments as well. Why are my tasks timing out? This is a big one. There's a timeout setting for tasks, and there's a misfire threshold in Quartz. And I'll talk about Quartz settings in a moment. The default is pretty small, and you might have a task that needs to run for 5 minutes, and you might find it doesn't work. In fact, one more thing I just literally started to work on yesterday. Guess what? Cloudflare also has a limit. Some of you know this already. If a request goes through Cloudflare and the page that you're calling doesn't respond within 100 seconds, Cloudflare will send you a rejection. So Cloudflare could send a rejection to your scheduled task request saying, hey, the page didn't respond, and it gets a 524 status code. The page does run, right? So if you're looking at did the result happen, the result will happen. But if you're looking at the scheduled task mechanism or whatever, you'll go, hey, it said it failed. So, or if the published output, that might fail. So again, the thing will run, but the client will be told, no, it took longer than 100 seconds. And that's a Cloudflare thing. And I'm working on a resource to talk more about that. And then if the task that you're running is a ColdFusion page, if the URL you're calling is a ColdFusion page, then you can also control the timeout of that page in the timeout of the CF admin of that CF server, or the code you write. There's a CF setting request timeout. Again, this could get really complicated. Please, let's move on. There's a lot to consider. We don't have time to get into all these details. Why have my tasks all disappeared, right? I'm sure some of you have seen that before. And that can happen if the underlying Neo XML file called Neo cron, if that gets corrupted, boom, show's over. All your scheduled tasks disappear. I'll talk more about that later. So let's talk about those things that sometimes people say scheduled tasks can't do. These do work, but only in enterprise. So in enterprise, they can be chained. I skipped over that when I showed you the screen, but there's a notion of chaining and having dependencies from one task to another. There's a notion of having an intelligent response to errors in tasks or triggering one task based on another. There's lifecycle methods. Again, I'll leave you to learn more about this later. You can group tasks, as we showed. You can call CFCs instead of just URLs. Since CF10, these things are all in CF Enterprise, Dev, or the Trial Edition. Or if you use command box, although I'll say if you put in a license key for standard, then command box would stop working because command box relies on a mechanism that can only work with anything but standard. So when I say command box, I'm presuming you're not using standard because you can't run standard in command box. So anyway, all these, you'll find you could do these things with those. But if you put in a standard license key, those things don't work. So that's where somebody could say, hey, it doesn't work. And that's why I pressed Trist earlier. What they were describing wasn't one of these things. It was one of those more typical challenges that I don't think has anything to do with being standard or developer. All right, moving on. There are more features. I've hinted at some of these already. There's event handling. There's date exclusions. You could say don't run it on a particular date. There's exception handling, misfires, exceptions, retry counts. There's a YouTube video talking about those if you're interested. There's chaining. There's clustering. And all these are covered in the developer guide. Now, I should have given a little more insight to the clustering. Clustered scheduled tasks has nothing to do with ColdFusion Enterprise. I did not say that was in Enterprise only. No. Clustering is, you might go, wait, yes, ColdFusion clustering, that's only in Enterprise. Yes, you're right. But clustered scheduled tasks has nothing to do with ColdFusion clustering. Clustered scheduled tasks simply means the definition of the scheduled task will be stored not in a file on ColdFusion, but in a database. You will name a database, and the scheduled task will be defined in the database. And if you have two instances that all point to the same database, they could share the same scheduled tasks. So two or more instances could have the same scheduled tasks, and the mechanism within Quartz will handle this and will go, okay, I'll make sure only one of these run it. You want to run it? Okay, you run it. You couldn't run it? Okay, you run it. And it'll track in the database who ran it and when, and all that will be presented back to ColdFusion as if it was just running a scheduled task, but under the covers, it's all done through a database. That's pretty cool. And again, it's worthy of its own presentation, but it's covered in the dev guide. So we're going to move on. Now, if you try, I shouldn't have said these features because clustering, I'm pretty confident clustering is not maybe it is. Maybe they hold it in Enterprise. I'm sorry, I should have checked. But anyway, if you try things in the admin on an edition that isn't what supports them, it'll tell you that's not supported in this edition. And in the logs, you'll see a message that says you've reached the feature router saying it's not available. And again, let's move on. I've given you enough detail to follow it up on these things on your own. Let's move on to the underlying task configuration file. So that cron is the place where things are stored about scheduled tasks, for better or worse. We really need to protect it, because if it gets corrupted, we're in trouble. So I did a tracker ticket. That's the URL for tracker.adobe.com. And that's the ticket number where I raised a concern saying, hey, we can't just have the current feature in CF for Neo XML files. It creates one backup, and every time anything changes, it creates another backup. And that can be disastrous because you could lose your Neo XML files through some mistake, and now you don't have any recovery because the backup got written over with a bad thing. So anyway, you'll just need to recover. And you can, let me just make sure you guys who hit this problem hear this. You can get a stock Neo XML file that's empty. That's better than nothing. It's not empty. I want to be clear. It's not empty. It's got certain default things in it, but it doesn't have any scheduled tasks defined. And that's available online. I created a place. Well, there's a place where things like this can be put, and I created in there a folder where default stock config files for the CF administrator are in the CFML repo, for those that know that. I created a place to track stock Neo files. So anyway, I'll leave you to read about that. And then again, the scheduled tasks are based on Quartz, and Quartz is 2.4 as of CF 2023. And the Quartz properties file for managing the Quartz aspect of scheduled tasks is in CFusion Lib Quartz, literally in ColdFusion's Lib Quartz under CFusion, like CFusion logs, there's CFusion Lib, and under that is Quartz. And the Quartz properties file is really the exact same file from CF10 to CF 2023. But the point is, if you want to look at it and tweak it, go to town. And when you read about it in the Quartz docs, there's where it is. And there's a bunch of interesting plugins in Quartz. It might be worth your knowing. Quartz has plugins that you could add, and you would configure that file to name them. There's a trigger history plugin. There's a job history plugin. There's a XML scheduled processing plugin. There's a shutdown hook plugin. And you can learn more about these from this blog post. Now, I know it says 2012, but Quartz, like ColdFusion, is fundamentally the same. I mean, they both evolve over time, but fundamentals are the same. even from 10, 12 years ago. So check out that blog post. I did try one of these and it worked. So I'll leave you to read about that. The links are wrong, and I tried to get it corrected in the site, but I couldn't get a comment in or something like that. So where it has a link to the docs, this would be a correct link. Like to get to that config plugins page that discusses all these, there's the real URL. That blog post of Nurkowitz was not the right URL, and I couldn't get it changed. Anyway, I'll leave you to look into that on your own. There's also additional Quartz tools you should at least be aware of. I haven't explored all of them. There's a Quartz Manager open source GitHub project. There's a Quartz Desk tool that's got free and commercial versions. There's a Piezo. So if you want to learn more about managing Quartz stuff without respect to ColdFusion, there's tools to help you with that might be interesting. As far as controlling who can access and run scheduled tasks, you should know that since CF10, they created this notion of application level tasks and server level tasks. And when you create them in either the CF admin or the CF scheduled tag, you can say this is a server level task. It should apply to all applications, or this is an application level task, and then only a certain application could manage it with CF schedule, for example. So anyway, there is that. You could read the docs to learn more about that. And in the admin, if you didn't know, you can grant access to the admin to different people. That's worthy of its own talk. I've written about it in the past. Maybe gave a talk 10 or 20 years ago. The capability, again, is not new. It's not really different. It's still there in current versions of CF. Yes, you could have the admin user and a Bob Jones user, and Bob Jones can access scheduled tasks, but he can't access anything but scheduled tasks. That's another whole subject, but yes, you can do that. And then you can control access to schedule the tag called cfschedule through what's called sandboxing. Again, I wrote about that a long time ago, and some people leverage it, most people don't, but it's a cool capability. So anyway, we'll move on. Finally, what are alternatives to creating scheduled tasks? So one is you can do in the OS, there's scheduled task mechanisms built in to Windows, to Linux. Linux calls it cron. Windows calls it Task Scheduler, right? I happen to be sitting on a Windows machine right now. You can see me doing that. I'm going to just type task. And there's Task Manager. Well, then there's Task Scheduler. And it opens up a Windows interface, and I'll bring it onto the screen. There you go. And you can just say, I want to create a task. And it says, what do you want it to do? And it leads you through screens that show you how to name it, and then what triggers on which to make it run, and then what actions to perform. And among the actions are to start a program. And in starting a program, you could name a browser, and the browser can run a URL. So again, this is nothing to do with ColdFusion. And you can Google or Bing or DuckDuckGo, whatever you like to look at, ChatGPT. You can find out how to run a URL as a scheduled task in your OS, either in Windows or in Linux or Mac OS, which runs Unix, I know. All right, so that's a tool. And then cfHTTP. I showed you earlier that you could use cfHTTP as a diagnostic tool, but you could also, and let me just say this, that Cloudflare problem, one of the fixes I proposed was, remember I said, Cloudflare doesn't have a problem running a cfHTTP URL. It just has a problem running a scheduled task URL. So I said one solution would be have your scheduled task call a CF page, and the CF page does a cfHTTP to the URL you really want to run. And then that cfHTTP would go to that URL, and that URL goes through Cloudflare, and Cloudflare goes, oh, cfHTTP, welcome, you come on right in. But if it had come directly from the scheduled task, it'd go, who the hell are you? Get out of here. I don't talk to you, scheduled task mechanism. It's stupid, but it is what it is. But again, there's also a solution in Cloudflare to fix it. So anyway, I'm just saying this would be another way to do a scheduled task. You could create a page that does a cfHTTP. If there was some reason that made sense, you could create a page that does a cfHTTP, and then you could run it through various means of your own, not through scheduled tasks. But again, I'm not going to get into the details of that. I also want to tell you that those of you in the Ortus world, and especially using ColdBox, can use ColdBox scheduled tasks. So ColdBox framework, CMS framework, has scheduled tasks, and some people use that as their way to do scheduled tasks. And it's got, in, as always with Ortus stuff, it's got more capability, more power, more flexibility. It's just different, so you got to learn it. But if you're in that space, then you might be willing to take the time to learn that. This talk is for those who are in the normal CF world of just how do I do stuff with what's built in CF. And that sometimes puts me at odds with that crowd because they go, oh, why don't you just use command box, or why don't you just use cold box? Well, not everybody does. I have to help people where they are. And I spend all day with people who, by and large, are running regular CF servers. They're not running command box. So I show you things about how to do things. And I don't say, hey, command box can do that. You don't need this, because if they're running on a server that's running ColdFusion, it doesn't help them to know the command box does it differently. But I like to point it out so that everybody knows they got choices. And if you're a developer, sometimes doing things in command box is certainly easier. Well, anyway, back to this. This is about cold box, and not everything in the cold box, command box world requires that you be using the thing like cold box. So you need to look into that yourself. Just beware. Sometimes you'll be shown something and you'll think, I can't use that. Well, you can. You just got to read about it. They'll tell you whether it's something you can use with normal CF. And so there's a documentation called Digging Deeper into Scheduled Tasks with ColdBox. I'll leave you to explore that. And then there was a CFcasts video, right? So this cfcasts.com is their repository of videos, and that their Into the Box conference in 2021, Brad did a talk on scheduling tasks the human way. He regarded it as more humane or human than regular CF scheduled tasks, and he talked about how much better they were. There's also CBQ, the Q being for queue. So CBQ is another cold box and command Ortus solution, a protocol-based queuing system for cold box, and you can use it for scheduling. And if you look at the docs, you'll see that. And then now I want some of you to see this. Boxlang is a new language from Ortus, and that's another whole discussion. In fact, that's what's going to be on next week. We're going to have Brad and Luis on talking about a particular aspect of Boxlang, so you can come back and visit us for that. Well, anyway, Boxlang has in it a scheduled task framework, and if you go check out this URL, you can read about it, or they did a presentation on that subject at Into the Box, or I think it was CF Camp actually last in June. So anyway, they put the video up of the presentation from their talk, and it's just about the scheduled task framework. And it's cool because Luis also talks about pros and cons of the built-in scheduled task mechanism of CF and Lucy, and then he talks about why they think Boxlang's scheduled task framework has advantages. And it's not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but I wanted you to know, yeah, it's an alternative to consider. And then I mentioned Lucy. Those that use Lucy, yes, Lucy has scheduled tasks. So it's curious. There's no interface for managing them in the administrator, but you can do it through CF Schedule and other means. So anyway, if you want to learn more about scheduled tasks in Lucy, there's a doc page for learning that. Whew. So I know there was a comment. I'll get to that in a second, but I just want to wrap up. So I hope you agree. There is a lot more to scheduling than you may realize, both in terms of capabilities inside of CF and challenges, but there's ways to solve those challenges. And there's lots of resources to help, whether from Adobe or from other folks. And honestly, if you just hit challenges, of course you can reach out to the community, but if you don't find a good answer, that's what I do for a living. And you've heard the things that I've helped people solve, and there's more that I haven't even talked about, trust me. But insofar as the community, let me tell you, I have on my website, so cf411.com is a page of my website. It's a domain that redirects to a page of my website called the CF411 page of my site. And it's got 2,000 categories of resources and tools. And one of the categories is CF Social Help. In fact, I've renamed it to be CF Social Help, but that'll get you there too. Look better than Com Help. Anyway, moving on. CF Social Help is social media. You know, there's a Facebook CF group. There's a LinkedIn CF group. There's a Slack channel. There's the Adobe ColdFusion community. There's a Lucy community. There's an Ortus community. I point to all those on that URL right there. Go visit it and check out lots of ways to get help. That's the bottom line. So either if you don't find help in the community, reach out to me. And you can see my down in the bottom right corner, that's how you reach me, carehart.org, and Carehart is on all the social medias. And I'm definitely open to feedback about the presentation as well. So I look forward to anything you may have to say. So with that, thank you very much. Just a little bit early. Good. 5 minutes early. That's rare. Now, I did see Trist had a comment. You're right, Charlie. CF Standard does let scheduled tasks run. So now I need to find out how CF failed to connect to the URL. Well, again, do that CF HTTP. I can't tell if that's what you're saying you did. Do that CF HTTP, calling that URL, and dump the resulting CF HTTP variable and see what you get. And that'll be a clue. And if while we're talking, you do it and you have a thought, share it. Anybody else have any questions or comments while we wait a moment to see if Trist has more to say? I know I covered a lot really fast. I would expect there would be something that somebody might want to ask. And sometimes nobody wants to be the first one to ask a question, but somebody's got to be the first one. So feel free. Now's your chance. Jump in. There you go. I have a very heavy page, may run for 30 minutes and sometimes fails. Okay. I don't know if you're going to be continuing to write more stuff. I'll wait a moment to see if you are, but assuming you don't, well, I covered some of this. So first of all, if you're saying, right, so if you're saying that page that takes a long time to run, if you visit it yourself with either a browser or CFHTTP and it works to completion, then yes, we would say it must be a schedule a task issue. And I would argue under the covers, yes, it's a Quartz issue. And I mentioned in passing that Quartz had a timeout time, and that's configurable. So I'll leave you to explore that more on your own. But I do want to say you always have to be careful not to jump to the conclusion that that is the right answer, because I want to repeat. I said, if you do a CFHTTP, does it work? Yes or no? And then I said, if you do it in the browser, does it work? Yes or no? Because you might find when you do it in the browser, it also fails because browsers tend to have a mechanism where they say, I can't wait forever for this thing. And the browser could reject it. So you're saying it can take 30 minutes and it sometimes fails. How do you know it fails? Is it that you know it never completed and did the last thing it was supposed to do, like send an email or write to a database? Or did you get some failure in reply? And if so, where did you get that failure? So I know that's a lot of questions. I'll leave you to chew on it. But it just goes to show you all that these things there's a lot of moving parts. And there's different things that can affect an issue. And you have to think them through. And big part of what I do is help people think those things through, because it's natural to think, oh, I know what the problem is. And it turns out, when you get the right diagnostics, and that's what I'm really all about. Most of what I do is help people see what are the diagnostics that give us the evidence of what is going on. Because most of us, we have a problem and we Google it or we bring it up in social media and so offers their thoughts. And sometimes they're spot on and sometimes they're totally wrong because you haven't given them enough context and they're making a presumption themselves. And so the more information you can give, the more clear the problem is and the more obvious what the answer is. Well, often that's the challenge is nobody asks and they just throw out answers and people tried this and it doesn't work. And I see people conclude, well, so-and-so doesn't work or this thing doesn't work. I'm like, no. It could work, but maybe you're looking in the wrong direction for where's the cause of the problem. So gave you more things to look for. Good, cool. Look forward to hearing how that goes. And again, that was a good general point to land on because it's common to pretty much every problem I see out there in the community. And again, what I do all day, every day is help guide people to, let's find the right underlying diagnostics. It could be a log somewhere, it could be a tool that tracks what's going on. And so much of these things that we're talking about there seem like black boxes. ColdFusion seems like a black box. The web server seems like a black box. The schedule task mechanism, the page you're calling, blah, 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 Cloudflare. And they're not. They all generally have ways you can see what's going on. And if you can just think through what's going on, hell, it could be a firewall, it could be an antivirus tool. You just never know what it might be. So just lead people to considering from the most obvious thing back to, okay, if it wasn't that, what else could it be? If it isn't that, what else could it be? It's fun. And that's its own discussion. I'd like to do some time on troubleshooting. And I've done them over the years. I was looking back at my presentations page, just while we're waiting to see if there's any closing comments. I shared with you guys that presentations page. And if we go up to the top, you'll see I've got 177 different presentations. That's not presenting them different times. No, those are individually different presentations. Some of them I presented 2, 4, 5 times. So it's been like 1,000 times I've given a talk. But of these 177 presentations, if I do a find on trouble, I've done troubleshooting with Fusion Reactor. I've done troubleshooting common CF challenges, troubleshooting database performance problems, troubleshooting memory problems, post-crash troubleshooting your server with Fusion Reactor, troubleshoot Fusion. Did a lot with Fusion Reactor over the years. And then tools and techniques for server troubleshooting. That was back in 2009. CFusion, using CFusion for troubleshooting. So I've tried to share all kinds of tools and techniques over the years to help people. So again, I point that blog, that page out because I for some reason the community doesn't seem to point very often to people's presentations. You just don't see a lot of that in our community. I don't know why. Partly because they just don't know. But I want you to know that anything you're interested in, come to this page and do a find in your browser, and you might find, yeah, look, there's a talk. So I talked earlier about migrating admin settings. So I'm just going to move it over here. Migrating admins safely between versions. I did that last week. Coming up in September, October, at the cusp of the month, CF Summit, I'll be doing using Redis sessions for storage in CF and Lucy. And then I'll also be doing at CF Summit, understanding CF locks, how they work and how they can help or hurt. So there's just all kinds of topics about which people say, there's nothing left to talk about. I'm like, are you kidding? There's all kinds of topics that nobody's ever talked about. So that's what I'm here for. And I'd welcome any of you others who might want to give a talk. And with that, we're at the top of the hour. I don't seem to see any more questions. So again, I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Go forth and learn and help each other. And if I can help you, let me know. I'm here for you. And until the next time, I'll send a note out for next week. We'll have Luis and Brad, Lord willing. So talk to you then. See y'all.